Hello and welcome to this episode of Own the Journey, where we are focusing on bringing amazing wisdom from great business leaders and experts from around the world. Today we are coming to you from Kauffman Stadium, home of the Kansas City Royals. What an amazing place. And we have an extra special guest with us, Mr. Joel Goldberg, author, speaker, teamwork guru, all of these amazing things. Joel, thanks for taking some time to be with us today.
It's good to be here with you, Tom, and kind of cool to be here in my office, or at least my spring and summer office, so to speak. I'm usually not here in the fall and winter months, but it's good. There's a nice peace to Kauffman Stadium when it's empty like this.
That's right. Well, what an amazing place for us to be today. So for those of our viewers that don't really know your story and how you landed where you are today, tell us a little bit about your journey.
You know, I think that it's a journey that's really not all that different than most people's. I think where a lot of folks end up thinking that it's different is just it's a unique job. Right. I mean, when you have a role and a job in the public eye with something that so many people consume on television, like baseball, right, it becomes very unique. But really, the journey is not all that different than anyone else's. I mean, how many of us get handed something? How many of us get there we all want to get to the finish line before it starts, and it's really, you know, as this is in part titled, about the journey. Right. And so climbing the ranks, meeting the right people, making connections, putting in the hard work, the long hours, doing all the roles that at the time maybe I didn't want to do, but was part of working in smaller television markets and climbing and climbing and climbing. I mean, there are very few people that, whatever the industry, start in a place like the Royals or Kauffman Stadium. That's where you want to end up, and so I've been lucky enough that that's happened. What
a special story. And you're such a humble guy who has done so many amazing things. Talk to us about how you realized that a lot of your focus really was on culture and teamwork, and where you kind of came to the realization that was kind of a part of your story.
Yeah, I don't know that I really ever knew it. And, you know, I think the best I could say is that along the way, I'm being exposed to so many interesting stories and people and everything from, you know, big-time celebrities, whether it be athletes or even the occasional Hollywood people that might show up at a game, right, to you know, the behind-the-scenes people, the role players, the clubhouse attendants, the trainers, you know, all the pieces to the puzzle of a good organization that make it work. So I knew always along the way that maybe one day I'm gonna have a lot of stories that I could share with, I don't know, kids, grandkids. Mm-hmm. Maybe you should document some of this to write it in a book. I always knew that. I never really did anything about it. And then probably the latter part of 2016, early 2017, the light bulb went off about starting to do a lot of public speaking. And I understood that I had so many of these stories, and it was really a thought of, okay, what do these stories mean? How can they affect people? I mean, it's great to be able to go and say, hey, there was this one time where the craziest thing happened here, or, you know, this moment there, and that's fine. And it's also probably been told at a certain point. But what's the deeper meaning? How can it change people's lives? And so I started dabbling in that a little bit, caught the bug, and really realized that along the way, this was my dream. It was my dream to be on TV. It was my dream to talk about sports. What I didn't understand until later was all of the lessons learned in sports, especially baseball, that could really motivate and affect other people in terms of culture, in terms of teamwork, in terms of leadership. It's again the same thing. I don't think you step into it saying, I'm going to jump into this television career and learn more about culture. Right. You just over time, and if you're around long enough, you start to notice more things, and you start to look a little bit deeper. And so that's really what happened.
Well, I think that you've got an inherent desire to want to pay it forward and make a difference for people. And so taking all of those lessons, paying it forward, and this is one way of doing that. So on that topic, tell us one of the more pivotal stories that you've had the ability to experience over the year that was kind of transformative for you, or helped you to take the next step and really see what it means to have a healthy team.
Well, I think that there are a lot of them, and you know, my mind will go to one that happened here in 2008. We're sitting in the Diamond Club at Kauffman Stadium. I feel like in my mind this happened upstairs by one of the broadcast booths, and It's my first year here, 2008. I'd worked in St. Louis before that. I came here for a bigger role. It was what I believed was going to be the next step for me, and it was. It ended up being so. But I had never really covered a losing baseball team before. I'd come from St. Louis, where on a bad season maybe they were around 500.
Right.
And I didn't know what it was like to cover a team that had 90 losses, 100 losses, and I was still very much, the fan. I mean, I still am. It's in a different way now. And so it's my first year here. I'm wanting to make an impression. I'm getting to know the players. I'm kind of living and dying with these games because I want to see them do well and I want the fans to be happy. And Paul Splittorff, Royals all-time wins leader, one of our broadcast partners up until 2011 when he passed away, but just an amazing broadcaster, a mentor of mine. He pulls me aside after one game maybe and another loss, and he says, I'm going to give you some advice. And the funny part about this is he's given it to others because others have shared the same advice with me, so it wasn't just me. He said, I see you getting down about the losses. I see you getting frustrated. And not necessarily so much on the air, but just the energy down and all that. And he said there are a lot of important people that are paid a lot of money to lose sleep over the losses, and you're not one of them. And my initial thought was he telling me not to care? And it didn't take too long to sink in to realize that what he was saying was that win or lose, you got a job to do. You got to go on camera and deliver a show every single night. And he wasn't telling me make it sound better than it is. He wasn't telling me to say that they're good when they're bad. What he was saying was don't let getting upset about these losses sink your ability to do your job. People are tuning in every single night, and they don't want to see you moping. They don't want to see you complaining. They want to see you passionate about baseball. Mm-hmm. And so, in a weird way, it hardened me against any of the losses where I could walk out of this building after a rough loss and it's just another day. But it also enabled me to always keep that energy up. And that's a message I like to share with people because nothing ever goes as planned. How often do you go about your day or go to the office in whatever role you have in whatever company and profession you're in where things go the way you expected or the way you wanted? Stuff happens. So every day. So how do you not let it affect you?
Right.
And that's the message, is that there's some things that are out of your control. I certainly couldn't control whether they were winning or losing, but I could control my output and my energy to it.
Right.
So that's the one thing I like to tell people. I mean, among many others, that was really changing for me. It had me coming in here or whatever stadium every single day upbeat, every single day wanting to do a job. And yeah, some days are easier than others, but in the end, can you be successful and can you bring it every single day? That doesn't have to be in front of a camera. In my case, it is.
Yeah, I think it's a great lesson. In business, we get knocked down daily, and if you're gonna have a successful business, you've got to learn to persevere no matter what. So
well, and that's one of the beauties of baseball, and I say this in most of my speeches, is we could argue what sport is more difficult or who's the toughest or who works. First off, the best of the pro athletes, like the best business people, they work hard. And so to sit there and say football players work harder, baseball, the good ones all work hard.
Right.
The best work hard and they have unbelievable talent. But what makes baseball unique is it's every day. And again, doesn't mean anything is different in terms of output for football, but they're geared up for one day. Mm-hmm. And they put everything into that. And you can't really gear up for it that way in baseball because you put all your eggs in basket in game 50. What about game number 51, 52, 53, 60, 60? 15 days later you might have played 15 more games. And so there's a pacing, like a marathon pacing to it. That to me is much more indicative of normal life.
Yep.
Now, I don't recommend to people that you shoot for being successful 30% of the time like a good hitter in baseball, but there is a great lesson in handling failure. This sport of baseball deals with more failure than any other sport. And so if you have to learn as a good player to handle failure 70% of the time, as a mediocre player 75, maybe even 80% of the time, and that eats at you every single day, again, how do you come back and do it the next day? That's much more like real life to me than other sports.
I would agree with that. And I think one of the challenges that all businesses are dealing with in today's world is the big turnover of employees and what it means to keep people happy. And there's a little bit, from an employer perspective, there's a little bit of a farce out there that you can go to your job and every day is a good day and you're always going to love what you do, and that's just not the real world. How do you think employers should deal with that? I mean, it's a real problem. I mean, 30% success rate, and if you're lucky, you're going to, in the business world, you're going to have 70% of the time where you have a good day. If you're really lucky, most people are more like 40 to 50% having a good day.
Well, I think a lot of it's perspective, and now, I mean, this is as complicated of a time in the workplace as there's ever been.
Agreed.
Maybe I'm exaggerating, because all of this in some form or another does come in cycles. That's true at everything in life.
Oh yeah.
The housing market, the cycle of teams winning and losing, on and on. I mean, everything usually comes back around, right? The housing market's big, it goes back down. It's not going to stay there forever. It comes back. So
interest rate, inflation,
interest rate, all of it. I mean, have we ever seen anything like this before? Maybe not this, but we've seen other things.
Yes.
Right? This is not our first time dealing with disruption. This is not our first time with dealing with adversity. This is not our first time with dealing with unhappy employees or people or whatever it might be. So I still think that there's always a common theme of taking care of people. And it's not as simple, this as a business owner, it's not as simple as just saying, okay, let's make it a fun place to work. Hey, let's have the kegerator down in the basement or the kitchen, and that way somehow we must have culture.
Right.
Well, it becomes fun, but still at the end, how are people motivated to do what they do and to stay too? And not everybody wants to stay. I see so many really good companies that maybe are smaller that take care of their people to only see them go on. And you just may not be able to keep them. But here's the interesting thing. Usually, why are they leaving? Usually for the money, right? Maybe greater opportunity. But in the end, if it's just about the money, they'll probably come back. Or they'll come back to somewhere similar to it. You go out and you find something. I mean, you see in baseball too, and you can't blame them. Guys will leave for the massive contract elsewhere, and maybe later on you hear them say, I really liked it where I was at.
Yeah.
And I always get a kick out of when people say, well, I mean, what's the difference between, how could he turn down $150 million? What's the difference between $150 million and $250 million? $100 million? You would do it, I would do it.
Yeah.
But in the end, once that runs its course, people kind of want to go back to where they're comfortable, where they're accepted, where they're part of something. And so I think, to me, it doesn't guarantee that you keep everyone, but for all the small businesses, medium-sized businesses out there that are watching this, that have been through this, they're going to always continue to go through that. Right. So I think if you're consistent with the way you treat people, the way you put people in, and yeah, sure, throw in the kegerator, throw in the fun parties, throw in the happy hours, throw in the team bonding and all those fun activities, but I don't think that that's the answer. I think that's just part of the piece to make it something unique. But in the end, ultimately, how do you treat people? Do you value their opinion? Do they have a voice? Are you taking care of them not just financially and benefits wise, but a safe and healthy workplace with people that believe in each other and work well together? I think when you build that culture, you have to understand you're going to lose people. But if you have that foundation, culture to me is foundational. If and provided, if you're doing it right, if you focus on it every day. So the foundation of a company to me is rooted in their culture. When I came here in 2008, there wasn't really much of a culture. It was one of the first things that Dayton Moore, their general manager, now president, said to me at the time. I said, what are you trying to do here? He said, I'm looking to build a championship culture. And he built it. But that didn't happen overnight. Now, once you've built it, and even as you're building it, you have to focus on it every single day. Little small things, just the tiny things, and they all add up. And what they do is they either make people want to stay here, or they make people want to come here. And then if you have that foundation of the right people, you're not asking someone to come in here and reinvent a culture, or to come up with a culture, or to figure all of that out. It's already in place.
And it feels like home for them.
It feels like home.
And it fits. And I think that brings into another interesting point, that when you're building that culture, there's a point in time that I think all small business owners, and I know that you deal with it in baseball, that to have the culture you want, you may have somebody that creates a lot of value, value, but doesn't fit the culture. And sometimes you have to have that courageous conversation and ask them to leave.
That's right. And it is so easy to get lured into finding the best person in terms of talent. Give me this guy because of his stats. Give me her because of her success rate. On and on and on, right? And the credentials are great, but do they fit?
Right.
First off, you can't build a team. Maybe a few of the, few of the sports franchises over the years have done this. Think about some of the teams that LeBron James has played on, where you got multiple superstars, and how are they going to share the ball and somehow it works? But usually it doesn't.
Right.
Usually you have to find not just the right people, but the right roles. And so, for the most part, look at a Yankees team or something like that, and every year you watch it in the media, and the reaction of fans is whoever spends the most money. Oh my gosh, look at what the Dodgers did, or look at what it's always the big market teams, the Yankees did. Well, you know how many titles the Yankees and the Royals have combined over the last 20 years too. Royals have won and the Yankees have won. And so the Yankees throw a ton of money at everything. And I don't know that they have a bad culture there either, but it's not just culture, it's got to be fit, it's got to be the right pieces. Mm-hmm. And to me, that's all the role players. I always say, in any organization, whatever it is, who's that person that maybe people don't know their name or what they do, or they're not a quote-unquote face of the franchise. Maybe it's somebody answering phones, maybe it's someone, maybe it's the janitor, maybe whatever it is. And then you sit there and say, how would we do tomorrow if they weren't here? How would we do next week if they were gone for a week?
100%.
I was doing a speech a bunch of years ago, and it was for a smaller company, and they were doing an event for their employees and families, and it was kind of an end of the year deal and awards. Well, they wanted to honor the lady that worked there that orders all those trophies and awards, but they almost messed the whole thing up. They couldn't have her order one for herself, but they just weren't very good at doing it themselves.
Right.
And it was that reminder of well, we're sort of honoring you for doing all these little things that we're really not capable of doing at the level that you do them. And so to me, here's how you keep people either staying or coming back or bringing in new people. Is we all talk, word gets around, hey, J Mark does this for me, or this company does this for me, and boy, they really treated me right. I left there, I didn't leave there because it was a bad place, I just left there for a bigger opportunity, but you know what, they're always going to take care of me. And word gets around, and now people want to go and work for you, whoever that company is. And so the Royals have built that here, where now are they going to win a bid for the highest player? I mean, they could, I guess, if they wanted to, but they've got to be smart about the way they spend their money. Sure. But what is almost every time going to happen is whoever they acquire in a trade, they sign in free agency, or even whoever they draft, almost always has this high level of character that it's not that the Royals are the only team that cares about it, but I think that there are other organizations that say, yeah, that's great, but we want the better stats. Whereas here they say, we want the great stats, but I don't want to sacrifice the character and the fit just to get those numbers.
Right.
And I think that reputation starts to build, and provided again that you take care of it every day. Just dotting the I's, crossing the T's. Culture's not a flip a switch type of thing. It never will be.
No.
But it's also subtle, and so if you're just paying attention to those details every single day, people know it. They may not be keeping score, but they feel it, they're aware of it, and that's how you end up either keeping people or always attracting the right type of people.
Hey, I couldn't agree more. I believe that it's the daily simple conversations, the checking on the family, making sure that people can take the time off to take care of their family. It's caring. It's fundamental. So you recently joined us on a webinar in one of our summit series, and you shared a story about you shared a story about where you had one of the players that came into the organization, and he was not necessarily the big stats guy, and he wasn't always doing it, but he was the guy in the locker room that brought the team together when they needed to come together. Yeah. Would you mind to share that story just a little bit? It was really meaningful. Yeah,
it's a story about Raul Ibanez. It's one of my favorite stories to tell. And Raul, and I wrote about this in my book, and so it's in a chapter called Reading the Room. And the reason why I call it Reading the Room, and we kind of know what that is that he was that sort of wise veteran that just understood when the right time was. And how many of us have something to say or want to deal with something, and then if the timing is off, it's not really well received or it falls on deaf ears. Now, when you're 42 years old, as Raul was when he came back to the Royals in the final stint of his career, you don't stay around the game of baseball to 42 years old unless you've done one of two things, probably both. One, have success, on the field, which he had, but I mean, he was at the end, he wasn't producing a whole lot anymore.
Right.
And two, at that point, more significantly, if you have to have treated people the right way and earned respect every step of the way.
Sure.
And he had done that. So the background, and I like this because it tells a bit of his family character, is that Raul Ibanez was born in the Bronx, New York. But his family had just moved to the United States in New York. Cuban descent. His mom, his dad, his two older brothers are in Cuba. Now, back in the early 70s, you didn't have to defect. You could buy your way out of the country by working for the government. So this gives you a little bit of a feel for the dedication and the sacrifice of his father.
Sure.
His father was a very successful, and I assume well-compensated chemist. So obviously a smart guy. I mean, I assume a chemist is smart. I wasn't really any good at chemistry or anything with science, but I would assume very smart guy. But I think they probably wanted that freedom and to come to the United States. And so he gave up that job as a chemist to work in the fields picking sugarcane. Was able to buy his way out. They end up in New York. Raul was born in 1972, shortly after they came to the United States, in the Bronx, New York, and he would eventually go on and play for the Kansas City Royals and the Yankees and the Phillies and the Mariners and the Angels, and beloved everywhere. Just that sort of caring, soft-spoken, highly respected guy, fully bilingual. So he had the ear of the English-speaking guys, the Spanish-speaking guys, sometimes both at the same time. And now here he is, cut by the Los Angeles Angels in 2014, and the Royals pick him up. Now you look at the numbers and you sit there and say, well, he's not really even doing anything. He's at that point now where, all right, as an organization, you say, okay, well, here's their resume. They've been around, but they're not producing anymore. What's the point? The Royals knew exactly what they were doing. It's 2014. They haven't been in the playoffs since 1985. He's that veteran voice. He has a reputation around the game. He doesn't need to be the superstar. He's that role player that can do things in terms of culture, in terms of leadership, that doesn't have to be your top producer. And so I always say this: why do the Royals players that won a pennant that year, made it to Game 7 of the World Series before losing in Game 7 to the San Francisco Giants, why do so many players on that team credit Raul Ibanez for the success of that team when he hit 188 with 2 home runs for the Royals before retiring, and he wasn't even on the active playoff roster? And the reason was the influence that he had. And so in July, about a month after he got here, of 2014, they've lost 4 in a row. He calls a players-only meeting in Chicago before they face the White Sox that evening. There aren't a lot of players-only meetings in baseball. There aren't a lot of meetings in baseball. Meetings are generally about scouting reports, going over scouting reports. Baseball is not a somebody stand up and give a rah-rah speech type of sport, because 162 of those a year, it's too much.
Right.
So when you're actually having an official team-wide meeting like that isn't about, I don't know, the union or health benefits or something like that, when it's about your performance, usually things aren't going very well. He calls his players-only meeting, and the way he explained it to me is he basically said to these guys, here he is at 42, you got 20-something-year-olds on this team, old enough to be his son. Hey, you guys don't understand how good you are. You don't understand that you are as good as anyone in baseball, and you need to start acting like it. And I've got friends and superstars all over the league that have said to me, we don't want to face you if you make it in the playoffs, because your bullpen is the best in baseball. You got the best defense in baseball. You guys do all the little things right, and the speed and the stolen bases. He said, you guys are as good as anyone. You need to start playing that way. And they go on to win something like 27 of the next 32 games. And I could still forever picture it. They clinch on the final Friday of the season, September 2014, in Chicago against the White Sox, in the exact same place he gave that speech. And so I get into the clubhouse there at I think at the time it was called U.S. Cellular Field, or maybe it was Guaranteed Rate at that point. It was probably U.S. Cellular. and the champagne's flying, and he's got a champagne bottle in one hand, he's got a cigar in another, and he's just sitting back with a smile on his face like a proud father. So I love that story, because here's a guy that came from a very humble background, earned everything that he had, hit a lot of home runs in his career, but at this point he just couldn't produce the way that he had before. Yeah. Yet he still made an impact, a major impact on an organization. And if you go and look that up in the stats, you give someone the assignment and say, hey, go look up what Raul Ibanez's stats were and why he was able to help lead the Royals to their first playoff berth in 29 years, you'd struggle to find it. I mean, the only thing you could find is that in a 1-0 win at Oakland after they had signed him, he hit the solo home run, so he was the winning RBI there. Yeah. You're not going to find anything else. It doesn't show up in the numbers. Not everything does. No,
I couldn't agree more. And I think one of the gifts in that whole thing that we share within our company, and I want to make sure many other people understand, is the leader mentality. That anybody in an organization can step up and be a leader or influence somebody else, and it becomes that teamwork in an environment that really brings everybody together, that either wins the game or wins the business.
And I think, and I started off that by saying that the chapter in the book was read the room. There also has to be a level of understanding right and wrong time. Mm-hmm. That's true for a superstar who's probably going to have more leeway. Look, if you're the top producer in an organization, or you're the CEO, or you're someone with the big title, and then you probably have a little bit more leeway to do that whenever. I'd still suggest that there's a right and a wrong time. Absolutely. But if you're someone like Raul Ibanez that had the respect but wasn't even playing every single day, you really need to make sure you get that right, so that there isn't the roll of the eyes, so there isn't like, what is this dude talking about? Right. Fortunately, he had the respect of everybody, so that was huge. And then he knew, he'd been around so long, he knew this is the moment. And so that's one of the quotes that he said to me, is that, reading the room, understanding when it's the right time, looking at who's ready, or do they want to talk today, or do they want to be left alone? He basically said, I'm paraphrasing, that if you're a bull in a china shop, you'll never figure it out. So he had the right timing. A little sidebar to that, this is just a bit of inside baseball, but there's generally a rule that if you're going to call a big meeting or a players only meeting, and these things usually would happen as guys get to the stadium, 3 o'clock, or maybe you have the meeting at 4, before batting practice, after batting practice, something like that. You're not doing it at the end of the game, guys are going home. Never call a players only or a big meeting before you're about to face one of the best pitchers in baseball, because you're gonna have this inspirational speech and let's go get him, and then there's a good chance if you're facing one of the top guys in baseball, you're probably gonna lose. Yeah. And now it's like, well, we're in the same place. So I think he waited. The 4th straight loss came against Chris Sale, who was one of the top pitchers at that point in baseball, and it's like, do you really want to give this rah-rah speech, let's go get him and turn things around, before you're about to face a guy that you're probably not going to get any hits off of? So they lost that game to him, and then they did it the next day.
Yeah, very good. Yeah, timing is everything. And I think, excuse me, I think as a part of that, and not only reading the room, but I think a lot of it has to do with being able to communicate in a way that people can hear what you're saying. And oftentimes what happens in an organization, people are using the wrong language. It becomes a very you thing. It becomes, it's not a we thing. It becomes almost an attack rather than a let's come together, and it's not your problem, it's not my problem, it's our problem kind of a mentality that exists.
Well, the one that I hear a lot from a lot of managers, and this is true in all business too, is something along the lines of praise publicly and criticize privately.
For sure.
And so, that is not the setting to get up in front of everybody, embarrass someone. Right. If they're, and some of the best leaders that I've seen here, including Alex Gordon, who's a very quiet guy, but he, in a similar way maybe to Raul Ibanez, was a guy that earned so much respect over time that he didn't need to say a whole lot. Raul Ibanez is not a guy that was going to yell. Alex Gordon was not a guy that was going to yell, but I can tell you that when Alex Gordon needed to call someone out for performance or not acting right or whatever it was almost always going to be something in private, from everything I understand, and a one-on-one conversation. But yet you want to pat a guy on the back or tell him that he's doing a great job, then you get that audience.
In that public environment, yeah, for sure. And I think that one of the things that a lot of organizations have to figure out over time is that for culture to be really strong, you have to have culture champions built throughout the organization, not just at certain roles or certain executive level or what it may be. And when you have those people that are the culture champions, they're not afraid to mentor and coach people behind closed doors and help them out, take them aside and have those courageous conversations or inspirational conversations or whatever it may be to get them right. So bringing the team in and recognizing that just because somebody doesn't always bat 1,000, that they can still bring a lot of value to the table.
And understanding that you can have those culture champions, as you referred to, in all roles, and when you have them coming from different departments or different roles, so that means, and Dayton Moore said this to me when he told me he wanted to build a championship culture here. He said, I'm not just talking about the 25 guys in the clubhouse in the locker room. I'm talking about the ticket takers and the vendors and maybe the accountant upstairs and the security person and the parking lot attendant. I mean, it's got to be everyone, the fans. And so, I always thought when he told me that, 2008, and then when I saw the parade in 2015 and you see 800,000 people, there's your culture.
Yeah.
Because people all around town were wearing their KC Royals hats and their gear, and everywhere you went, that's all everyone was talking about. So everyone became a part of that. I'm not talking about the nature of a fan. I mean, fans by nature are going to be a bit bandwagon. That never bothers me. I always say there's room on the bandwagon to jump on and jump off anytime. People get a little bit hung up on, well, that's not a true fan because he's with him thick and thin and she's not, on all that stuff. People come and go, that's fine. But there is a pride factor here in town, I believe, about the way this organization goes about their business in terms of the character type of people that they have, the way they, the way they take care of the kids, and they're active in the community and all of that type of stuff. And so when you have, again, it's not just the superstars, but when you have everyone championing that culture from different roles and different backgrounds, that's where you start getting more people involved.
Yeah. And I think kind of the summary of what that says to me is one of my favorite lessons is that it matters how you win. It's not just about winning itself. Anybody can go out, put a team together and knock them down, but if you're doing it with honor, with respect, with the right culture in the team, then it really does make a difference and carries that forward.
And that trickles over to everybody else involved too.
Absolutely, yeah. So real quick, tell us just a little bit about your book and who it speaks to. Who did you write the book for?
Yeah, I mean the book, and this is going to sound probably intentionally simple, but the book is really for almost everyone, and so I'll explain that because I started my speaking business. It's really kind of a side hustle at one point. Now I spend as much time with that as I do the announcing. They both go together, and I love it. And when I started the speaking business, I was told by everyone, the number one piece of advice I got was, you got to write a book. Speakers write books. Well, there's a credibility factor to it, and on and on and on. And thankfully, I got some advice. Someone said to me, "You're not ready to write a book," which I was grateful for the honesty, because I wasn't. I'm thinking, okay, well, if I write a book, what do I write it about? I mean, I could write a book about how the Royals won a championship and worst to first, building the cult, but people have written that book already in some form. I can write a book about how to get into broadcasting. That's a pretty narrow audience. It's not really going to help with the whole credibility thing with the speech. So I started a podcast instead. So I started a podcast in November of 2017 called Rounding the Bases, and very much like the book, it was meant to be geared towards anyone interested in culture, leadership, teamwork, with at least for me, a desire to interview as many business people as I could. Entrepreneurs, CEOs, maybe some good causes every now and then too, and tell their story about how they've built what they have, what culture means to them. So that was every other week. Then it went to once a week, occasionally a sports guest. And early on I thought, let me ask 3 baseball themed questions that aren't really about baseball. What's the biggest home run you've hit in your career? What's the biggest swing and miss you've taken, and what did you learn from that? And the third question was, what is small ball, which was meant to be a culture question, but if the Royals won by doing all those little things that Raul Labagna said they're so good at, then okay, we all want to hit the home run in life. We all love the home run.
Sure.
We all love the big deal. We all love the big sale. We all love that big moment. But small ball were those little things. Small ball to me was kind of what do you do when no one's looking? So it really was meant to be the question of what's your culture, but I thought it was kind of a fun way to say it. What does small ball mean to you?
I love it.
And over time, over 2-3 years, it's like that was the most interesting answer. Everybody had a unique answer to that one, and that's when I started saying, you know what? I think I could write a book just based on that question. And so small ball, big results. I had all these baseball stories. I talked about at the beginning of this interview, knowing way back that I had all these stories, not sure what to do with them. Now I'm suddenly getting all these stories from, really interesting entrepreneurs and successful CEOs, and could we bring it all together? And so I came up with what I thought were the most significant small ball topics: how to build trust, reading the room, the importance of mentorship, the importance of taking care of people, doing the right thing, just things like that. And I built the book into each one of those topics being a chapter. Well, I got baseball, I got business, so I made every chapter an inning. So
nice.
the trust chapter is going to have the top of, I think, the fourth and the bottom of the fourth, and one is going to be about how I was able to build trust with a superstar athlete like Albert Pujols, why it took me so long, how I failed, what I learned from it. And then Jeff Jones, the CEO of H&R Block, who also wrote the intro for the book, he comes to H&R Block, had been at Uber and Target before that, and how do you take an iconic company and move it forward and build that trust when you're just the next CEO and we've seen you before. And so there are all these lessons. So to your question, Tom, about who's it for, it's for everyone, because a baseball fan will certainly enjoy the baseball, but if you get bored by the baseball, if you're not a baseball fan, I'm not doing my job right as a storyteller. There are great business lessons in there, but more than anything, it's just life motivational type of stuff.
I love it. So what stood out to you in that trust arena? You mentioned it a couple of times in your book and in some of the lessons, and that's obviously kind of the foundation of business. It's the foundation of good salesmanship. It's the foundation of how we all build things.
I think the biggest thing, and this will go back to a little bit about what we talked about with culture, in terms of you never take a day off, you can't take it for granted, you got to pay attention to those details. Trust to me is a subtle thing, and it's hard to earn, but it's very easy to throw away.
Yeah.
So do you need to invest in trust every day? Maybe not, but I always like to say it this way: it's almost like a bank account. We all like to pull out our money and spend it and make withdrawals. Well, you better make sure at some point that you make some deposits in it, or you're going to run out of money. That's trust. I mean, I'll use this example. I mean, there are players that played here that have been gone for 3 years, 5 years, 7 years. I mean, I've done 14 seasons here that, I may never talk to them again. I may never need anything again. But if I have their cell phone number or their contact, and they get married, or see that, a baby's born, or a family member passed away, or a big milestone, 3,000th hit or whatever home run, just a quick text message, thinking about you, wanting to pass on my condolences, or thinking about you, congrats on the award, I hope to see you down the road sometime. Yeah. So that if and when they come back here 5 years down the road, 10 years down the road, and it's like, I didn't know they were going to come back. Well, now suddenly I got to start building trust again. Mm-hmm. So, just to touch base every now and then and make those little deposits. And so whether that's someone leaving or whether that's just every now and then, I think that in all of our networks and all of our relationships, look, if you go years without talking to a family member and then suddenly, you reach out and you're asking for something, or you want them to just even be honest about something, I haven't talked to you and how long, and now right. So it's just kind of remembering that every day or every now and then investing in people, mm-hmm. and being consistent with it too. And I think that when you're able to do that on a regular basis, I was interviewing Alex Gordon the other day, and he's now, a year plus into retirement, and we were actually doing a virtual event together, and he said something about, it was really flattering and humbling, but he said, look, no one was more respected in that Royals clubhouse than than you were. He said this to me because of the way that you always treated everybody. So that doesn't mean you have to be perfect all the time, but I think you have to be consistent in the way you go about treating people, and then you build that trust through your actions and the way you pay attention to them, and then they tell people. And but you could throw that away in a heartbeat by doing something that could sabotage that.
Well, I think I love what you said about constantly making the deposits and making those investments, but I think there's some real wisdom in making sure that even though people go in different directions, whether they're leaving an organization or they're going in a different direction in their career, that you can make sure that they leave well. You can honor them and stay in touch, because eventually it's very likely that those things are going to come back in some form or another.
And here's what happens with it, and you have to go about this in the right, genuine way. But when you are consistent in the way you treat people, there's going to come a time where you need something, and it's not always easy to ask.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's a bigger withdrawal than what you're comfortable with. But if they know they can trust you, they're going to step up for you. And so it's got to come from a good place. It's got to come from a real place. But there's some times where I might need to say to a player, hey, look, man, I know you're busy right now, but I really badly need this. And instead of it, no, sorry, I'm not doing that, there's a good chance if you earn that trust that they're going to say, yeah, no, I'll do that for you. But I can't do it until okay, fine, I'll do it on your terms, but instead of getting that immediate no, look, we're all, every one of us, we're all pulled in different directions.
Always.
I don't know how you are, Tom, but for me, I'm still learning it. Saying no is a hard thing to do.
Oh, yeah.
Right? But it's also an important thing to do sometimes. Mm-hmm. It's harder to say no to people that have always treated you right, that you know that when they ask you for something, that it's coming from the right place. I don't want to say no to someone that has earned that respect, and they're not going to say no to me for the most part either. And so, I'll give you this quick example. When Alex Gordon was retiring after the 2020 season, he announced at the final week of the season, he's one of the greatest Royals of all time, local kid from Nebraska, and it was a very emotional time, and there's not an athlete I've spent more time with in my career. I mean, I was with him for 13 seasons.
Wow.
And everybody was sort of getting, all right, they get Alex Gordon on the press conference, they're getting the manager, they're getting the general manager here, some of the current players, and okay, we're all getting that. Can I get some interviews and some stuff with former players that maybe not everybody can get? And I ended up making, I believe, something like 15 text or phone calls to just past teammates. Eric Hosmer, Mike Moustakis, Gerard Dyson, on and on, Lorenzo Cain, guys that had all moved on, Ned Yost, who now was retired as the manager. And it was either 14 or 15, and I got a yes and either a phone call or a Zoom call from all 15 of them.
Wow.
Which is impossible to get that success rate ever. Now, I would say that I want to humbly say that the bulk of the yeses were because of their absolute admiration for Alex Gordon, who is a leader, who was a mentor for many of them. But a small piece of it, they didn't have to do that through me.
Right.
A small piece of it was the fact that I didn't always ask for those things. And so in this moment when I needed it, hey, I really need your perspective, I really need help with this. And suddenly I'm talking to all these guys. Hosmer's getting ready for a game with the Padres, and Moustakis is getting ready for a game with the Reds, and Dyson's getting ready for a game with I think he was the White Sox at that point. And Cain was sitting out due to COVID, but he was driving with his family from Texas back home or something like that. And every single one of them spoke. And so, again, yes, a testament to Gordon, but if I hadn't treated them right or put them in bad spots, they would have never replied.
Yeah, had the trust and the relationship there. Yeah, absolutely. Well, Joel, thank you so much for taking the time with us today. Cheers.
You weren't going there first. I was going there. So thanks, Tom.
Yeah, congratulations for owning your journey.
It's good to be in person.
Yeah, absolutely is.
Thanks.
Yeah, thank you.